After studying magic for 10 years, Shenyan finally realized that even though he had saved this world countless times, it was not his home. He also realized, I'm afraid I have to leave this place for the whole job. So, after that, he became the new teacher at Hogwarts, the mysterious companion of the wizard Geralt, the true savior of Gotham, the mastermind behind the Rune Land transformation, and the person who personally rescued the Emperor from his chair as for now. Why don't you come and see it yourself? This book is also known as Mikado II's Exhausted Death and A Little Mage's Shock to Asia. If you only want to see the Warhammer, you can jump to the middle of the Rune Land and start reading without much impact. Keywords of the novel. Serious people who are learning magic in Marvel without pop-ups, serious people who are learning magic in Marvel. Download the complete text, serious people who are learning magic in Marvel. Read the latest chapters. Chapter 1. The Method of Breaking Boundaries. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 1. The method of breaking boundaries. At exactly 9 o'clock, accompanied by a flash of blue light, Shenyan returned to the door of his temporary residence. He stood in front of the door, his fingers twitching slightly, and the door creaked open on its own. The man changed into his slippers as usual and walked to the living room, only to find someone standing with their back to him, their cloak bulging. Why am I not surprised at all? Strange. Shenyan didn't even look at him, so he went to the kitchen and opened the refrigerator to bring himself a can of Coca-Cola. There's still time to give up now, why? The man known as Strange turned around, wearing a tight-fitting robe and a red high-necked cloak, and his whole body was floating in the air. What do you mean? Shenyan laughed. He walked to the living room, his fingers twitched slightly, and another can of Coca-Cola flew out of the refrigerator, heading straight to Strange. Out of the window, the bustling night scene of New York witnessed this scene. There is a lot of traffic outside, isn't it lively? Strange raised his hand and took the flying cola, but did not drink it. He fell to the ground with a complex expression and a hint of pleading in his eyes. I know what you want to do, why? But it's impossible to succeed. You're widely respected here, why do you have to leave? Shenyan shook his head. He sat quietly there, sipping cola one after another. A blurry sound came from outside the window, and the high-rise apartments in downtown New York enjoyed the best view of the city. This also means that the people living here are usually very lonely. You can see the bustling traffic and the bustling lights, but you can't hear their specific voices. Seems isolated from the world. How many times have I saved this world, Strange? Shenyan suddenly asked. I can't remember clearly, replied the current Supreme Master. Yes, you can't remember clearly. And I almost can't remember what my hometown looks like. Strange pursed his lips and sat on the other side of the sofa, asking, can't this be your home? You know the answer, Shenyan smiled again. Let's get to the point, what do you want to do? I want to persuade you to stop. Strange gritted his teeth, feeling a bit embarrassed to bring up the matter. Shenyan did not answer him, which made his heart sink. A few seconds later, he lifted his hand and the quaint pendant on his chest rotated, revealing a sparkling green light. I've seen it, he said. The man who entered Kamatage earlier than him, more like his teacher than Gu-Yi, looked up and a hint of disappointment appeared in his eyes that he couldn't understand. He heard Shenyan say, what you see is only possibility, Strange. I told you a long time ago that the eye of a Go motorcycle can only. Forget it, how many possibilities have you seen? 10,000 types, said Strange. There are still many things I haven't had a chance to see. 10,000 types. Shenyan stood up and came to the French window. He turned his back to Strange and slowly spoke. At every moment, the future will give birth to different branches. We have studied topics related to prophecy and the future. Do you remember the conclusion we finally reached? I remember. What is our conclusion? They are all bullshit. Shenyan laughed heartily and said, yes. They are all bullshit. So, even if you see 10,000 possibilities of my failure, I still believe that among those countless failures, I will succeed once. This is enough for me. You are far superior to me, why? Strange closed his eyes and began discussing a topic unrelated to what they were currently discussing with almost a sigh. I don't understand why Gu-Yi asked me to succeed as the Supreme Master, and I don't understand why you accepted this. It was you who exterminated those Skurus people, and it was also you who killed Sanos with your own hands. Why? Why must we leave? Even willing to sacrifice our lives. Because I have to give it a try. Shenyan suddenly turned his head, his black hair fluttering, and a dark magical fluorescence lit up in his eyes. I must do this. For 10 years, everything I have done has been just a byproduct of it. I once turned to science for help, but science couldn't help me. So I turned to magic, and it took me 10 years to become the strongest, proficient in every magic. I even let those dimensional demons roll out of our world, allowing magic to truly be possessed by us. Using magic no longer requires a so-called cost. But this cannot conceal my deep longing, Strange. There is no second choice between this longing and my life. Yes, I know that based on existing theories, there are many different worlds outside, and it may take me 10,000 years to find what I belong to. But I don't care. I must give it a try. Strange knew that he could no longer persuade Shenyan. So he began to earnestly discuss the feasibility of this matter. If you want to break through the boundaries and leave according to the theories left by those lunatics in history, then how do you deal with the gaze of the gods outside the domain? Shenyan laughed again. He finally talked about this matter. The extraterrestrial gods are creatures floating outside the barriers of the world, known as gods, but they are completely unable to communicate or even look directly at. No one knows their intentions, and no one has a good ending after interacting with them. Moreover, in the long history of this world, there have been 2 instances of world wall damage. These 2 events have led to countless deaths and also brought vampires, werewolves, and various dark monsters into this world. Some people say that even a curious glance from their eyes would shatter the world. I don't want to teach you now, you have already graduated. So let me make a long story short, Strange. Looking at all the magic classics in the world, you will only find one spell about traveling through the world. Madman, Vivan, said Strange in a low voice. That infamous lunatic, madman, Vivan Dukovich. The founder of the existing theory of breaking boundaries and the discoverer of world barriers. He has a great reputation, but he does not have a good reputation in the history of wizards. The spell he invented has no name, and it is even said to have come from one of his dreams. Vivan believes that besides the world under our feet, there should be countless magnificent worlds waiting for human exploration. He was the strongest wizard of that era, and he considered himself a pioneer of humanity. He spent 30 years researching the method of breaking boundaries, and at the age of 178, he succeeded. Vivan relied on a so-called dream to study the complete world-breaking spell, and not only that, he even found the weakest barrier in the world. Next, he spent 40 years killing a hellish demon king and imprisoning his soul. Then, he summoned a wise angel from heaven at the weakest point of the world barrier. Then, he killed the wise angel and mixed the souls of the 2, along with his own magic. As soon as the 3 opposing forces came into contact, they burst out with unimaginable energy. At the end of his life, Vivan should be smiling. He succeeded, but he also died. From beginning to end, he never thought about how to survive such an explosion, and then the consequences came. The Baskerville Incident. When the explosion occurred, only 3 of the 70 mages accompanying him died on the spot. At the same time, on the transparent sky, a flesh and blood aggregate appeared, but no one knew. 3 days later, it had already devoured most of the creatures on Earth. When it was eradicated, it was 300 meters tall and its pollution was so strong that even ordinary mages would be directly contaminated, becoming a part of its rotten flesh and blood. Only those with high magical power can barely resist when wearing mental protective tools. Mages call for angels, but angels refuse. They turned to using sacrifices to summon demons, but the demons also refused and even declared that the earth was about to be destroyed. But in the end, Koichi solved it. Viven is excellent, but he is still bound by the times. In his time, spells like teleportation were not even discovered. We should stand on his shoulders and do better than him in reality. I think I can improve it. Strange gave a bitter smile. Yes, of course you can. He will not deny this matter, and no one can deny Shenyan's talent in magic along the way. He improved countless theories and ultimately summarized a set of casting methods that relied on mental distortion of reality, supplemented by magic. The difficulty has increased, but the power and efficiency have increased 5 times. In the field of magic, it is said that any mage should be grateful to him. Strange has no objections to this, and he is also one of the beneficiaries. What do you want to do? He asked. Shenyan smiled slightly and said, come with me. He snapped his fingers, and black magic converged in between, and the portal appeared in an instant. Do whatever you say, the man snapped his finger. The black magic converged between the fingers and opened a portal. Behind the door is his laboratory, arranged in a disorderly manner, yet displaying a strange order. Strange followed him inside, and a familiar scent of potion immediately shook his mind. He knew that this special fragrance was a potion called Clear Awakening. It can keep people rational, clear-headed, and has the same effect as its name. The only downside may be that the production process and raw materials are not very aesthetically pleasing. However, all potions are like this. Shenyan carried his hands behind his back and walked towards the middle of the laboratory. His casual attire instantly transformed into a quaint black robe, and the corners of his clothes moved without wind. The flickering light blue magical fluorescence appeared in an instant, and various complex inferences and data calculations were presented to Strange. How about it? My research results. Shenyan smiled slightly. You can study for a while to keep up with my progress. After reading these, you should have more confidence in me. Strange sighed helplessly, but then suddenly laughed a few seconds later. Take me as a laborer. Like before. You followed in on your own, Strange, I have never forced you. Yeah. The current Supreme Master rolled his eyes and said, you don't have it, but you always throw these data directly at me. How can I refuse after seeing these things? If you refuse, you won't be considered a wizard anymore. Shenyan laughed heartily and said, let's start, Strange, let's surpass this era once. Right at the beginning. If later readers find that the comments and chapter content are not accurate, it is normal. Because the author initially wrote this book with a playful attitude, many parts were fabricated and fabricated. However, while writing, I found that my income was decent, and furthermore, I really found joy in writing something. A reader suggested that I rewrite the previous part that was unsightly, and I think what he said is somewhat reasonable. So, that's all I did. Currently, this work is still ongoing. End of this chapter. Chapter 2. There is only a narrow line between genius and madman. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2. There is only a narrow line between genius and madman. Although not explicitly stated, Strange does have some bad premonitions about the future. Every time he was brought to Shenyan's laboratory, he would be forced to work overtime for a very long time, and now, this premonition has come true. To this day, he has been in the laboratory for 3 weeks, and his whole body seems a bit disoriented. However, Shenyan remained energetic, which was the advantage of entrusting complex computational work to others. He was only responsible for theory and problem-solving. Strange had also raised objections, but was pushed back with just one sentence. I can actually calculate data, but can you propose a research theory and our next direction? Strange yawned, clasped his hands together, and with a sudden wave, the calculation formulas and conjectures that filled the entire air disappeared. After 3 weeks of deduction, they gained a lot. At least they have figured out one thing. If we continue according to Viven's train of thought, there may be no future ahead, and not only that, it may even bring another big blow to the world. Although they have many superheroes to help this time, it's better not to die if you can avoid it. In Viven's vision, his method of breaking through the world was to explode the barriers, and then jump out before the gods of Outland noticed, like a cat stealing cookies while its owner was not paying attention. His ideas were rough and very imaginative, and his action was as terrifying as a cat's. Without consulting with anyone, he exploded the raw materials when they arrived, and even killed himself. He's doing this. The problem is very big. Firstly, according to existing research, world barriers are difficult to repair, as cookies eaten by cats will not return on their own. Secondly, without the obstruction of world barriers, the gods of Outland can easily discover a world with shattered world barriers. At that time, regardless of whether they are malicious or not, they will most likely come over curiously to take a look, just like watching lively humans. Shenyan doesn't want the world to be destroyed due to his own reasons. He wants to make an attempt to completely let go, but he doesn't want to be so insane that he wants to pull up the entire world as a price. In the end, being a person requires some principles. Otherwise, even if he successfully goes back, how should he face the people of that world? Go back to the main topic. Although Viven failed, his failure was also valuable. He at least proved one thing. World barriers can be destroyed, they are not indestructible. This also means that it can be changed. Their research and practical direction began from then on. 700 years ago, an unnamed successor of Viven invented a spell with his lifelong energy, the Eye of Sight. It has only one effect. Search and observe the weak points of the world barrier closest to the caster. When Shenyan closed his eyes and opened them again, a twinkle of starlight had already appeared in his eyes. His gaze penetrated everything and reached Antarctica. If the world barriers were conscious, they would now scream and slap Shenyan. His gaze was somewhat rogue. 5 minutes later, he found the weakest barrier in the world at this point in time. Antarctica. He turned his head and nodded slightly toward Strange, who quickly opened a portal. Behind the portal was a pale land covered in ice and snow. The two of them crossed the portal and stood in thin clothes amidst the snow and wind, looking at each other and seeing the excitement in each other's eyes. Strange had even completely forgotten what he wanted to stop him. So, according to our theory, Shenyan opened his hands, his index and middle fingers together, and tapped on his temple. The powerful magic flashed away, and he forcefully pulled out half of his soul. The pale blue phantom shadow swayed slightly in the wind and snow, revealing a kind of phantom beauty. With a sense of anticipation as a witness, Strange gazed in admiration at the man standing in front of him, whose face was weak and twisted in pain due to a split soul. "You're really crazy, what?" "I never said I'm not myself," Shenyan replied with a smile. "But I am more of a wizard, and we should always maintain curiosity in progress, shouldn't we?" In the midst of the snowstorm in Antarctica, he lifted his hand without hesitation. The light flashed by, and Strange knew what he had done. He had integrated half of his soul into the world's walls. The wisdom of countless predecessors, together with their deductions, has created this crazy method. In the 6th century AD, the madman Viven Dukovich died, and the only 3 of the 70 mages who accompanied him, after resolving the contamination of flesh and blood, divided his research results into 3 parts and sealed them in their own tombs. In the 13th century AD, an unnamed wizard from India concluded through calculation that world barriers could protect intelligent beings in the universe from the gaze of extraterrestrial gods, and proved this. In the 17th century AD, Isaac Newton left his last stack of manuscripts before his death. In the manuscript, he posed a question as an alchemist. As a wizard, he inevitably thought of Viven Dukovich at the end of his life and embarked on this path of research. From ancient times to the present, countless mages have fallen down this path one after another without complaint or regret. No one asks if it's worth it, no one knows if it will succeed, and no one knows if what they're doing is right. But why not give it a try? Human beings are such creatures. In the next second, Strange almost shed tears for what had happened. He did not cancel his gaze, and in his perspective, his senior brother's body standing in place was painted with the same color as the world wall. Void, but transparent white. He fell to the ground due to excessive excitement. Strange raised his hand and pointed at Shenyan, almost speechless, only able to utter broken words. Shenyan still stands. A strong impulse surged in his heart. Constantly surging, akin to instinct, akin to intuition. He realized that perhaps I have lived for this moment in these 10 years. Then, he smiled. That smile was like that of a child. We succeeded, Strange. This is his last sentence left for this world. When he opened his eyes again, he had already arrived at a novel realm. Countless glass bead-like objects wrapped around a rotating nebula. He stared at them with fascination and trembled deeply. Apart from these, there are also some huge black shadows lurking in the starry sea, silently existing, only existing, motionless, roaming. Only this word can describe his current behavior, and the smile on Shenyan's face never stopped. He succeeded. Standing on the shoulders and experiences of countless people, he and Strange succeeded. He left the world with his last precious wealth, and he himself is about to fulfill his wish. However, before this moment, he actually did not know whether he would die at the moment of crossing the world barrier, nor did he know whether the outside world was truly filled with other worlds as previously speculated. He just can't wait any longer. He would rather die on the way home than do nothing. God knows how long he suppressed himself. He came to this unfamiliar world alone for 10 years, from the age of 20 to 30, alone. He has been thinking about this all along. There are no superheroes or so called magic in that world. But that world has a home. A home that he is at least familiar with, rather than a specious place, rather than a place where even the legendary Jade Emperor in mythology wears Western armor. Although he never truly admitted it, Shenyan believed that he did miss his hometown. However, after a brief moment of excitement, he couldn't help but feel a bit stunned. He succeeded, yes, but after that. Shenyan suddenly realized that he had not calculated what to do after success. A bitter smile bloomed on his face. Is this the downside of being put to death and reborn? At the same time, a sense of exhaustion arose from the bottom of his heart, and that intuition reappeared, whispering in his heart in a way that humans could not yet understand. The wizard, who was alone, silently lifted his head. A world wrapped in transparent material slowly spun above his head, and inside it, there was a similar blue planet spinning. A brief resting place. Without hesitation, he entered into it. End of this chapter. Chapter 3. This kind of thing must be widely publicized. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3. This kind of thing must be widely publicized 1 month later. To be honest, I'm a bit disappointed. Shenyan turned his back to the guy lying on the high platform tightly bound by black magic chains behind him, drinking a cup of coffee in his hand. He dresses leisurely, but his expression is not very attractive. You attacked me without authorization and showed strong malice. Although I understand that people like you can do anything vulgar, including killing someone you see as, muggle for no reason. Unfortunately, I am not. But what I can't understand is the way you cast your spells, sir. You have a treasure in your hands, but you never thought about digging it out. He put down his coffee, turned around, took a stick from the guy's waist, and shook it in his hand. Why are you standing still with the inferior enchanting wand, even though you have reached the boundary of distorting reality with your spirit? Sigh. He let out a long sigh, and the guy looked at him in terror, moaning incessantly as if begging for mercy. I didn't listen to what he said at all. What a pity. Shenyan finally glanced carefully at the wand in his hand, shook his head, and threw it away. He raised his index finger in his right hand, and a thin layer of magical blade appeared. He walked into the poor local wizard, even revealing a gentle smile when he noticed his sweaty and frightened expression. Relax, sir. With the experience of your first few companions, I will be very careful when taking action this time. You won't die. At least not in that much pain. That guy struggled violently. Don't try to beg for mercy, accept this fact. You also had the intention of killing me when you blocked me in the back alley of that magical item trading market. The wizard smiled politely and said, there is a cause, there is a result. Sir, you are an adult, and you should take responsibility for your actions, shouldn't you? Half an hour later, he wiped the blood off his hands, walked out of the basement, and with a snap of his fingers, he used magic to clean up the mess inside. Later, he came to the courtyard of the rural villa where he had been living for a month and sat down. The scenery in the countryside of Europe is very beautiful, and it is not an exaggeration to say that the mountains and waters are beautiful. In such an environment, Shenyan began to think silently. Thank you to these kind-hearted people who brought him to his door. He has finally figured out the spell-casting methods of the wizards in this world. He came here for a month, intending to leave immediately, but found that the magic in this world was exceptionally strong, and there were spellcasters present. In the spirit of the researcher, he plans to stay for a period of time and collect some spells-related information. However, as an outsider, he did not have any contact with the casting world here. At most, he would go to the places where they privately traded items, broaden his horizons in the other world, and silently scan the books in those bookstores through his spiritual power. He can't refuse such a thing. Then, the good times didn't last long. After a rally, these few people set their sights on him. They thought he was a mischievous face, a muggle who had managed to sneak into a wizarding assembly, and wanted to kill him for it. They seemed extremely disgusted with muggles, who were just ordinary people. This is quite interesting. However, their barren knowledge cannot support their foolish minds to understand that the black-robed raw face hole is not devoid of magic, but rather that the magic has been fully restrained. This is precisely proof of his extremely high control over his magic. However, although the world has changed and the people here claim to be wizards rather than wizards, their physical structure is no different from what Shenyan perceives, and even the place where magic is stored remains unchanged, still in their brains. Thinking of this, he sighed again. How could he just stop moving forward like this? Why do we have to rely on that wand and spell? You could have gone further. What a pity. The spirit distorts reality, and the will forces it to follow its own commands. Isn't this path better than casting spells with a wand? He shook his head helplessly, feeling a sense of regret and unable to stop the birth of this emotion. At the beginning, the essence of the spell he learned from Koichi was borrowing. Mages coordinate with each other through complex gestures and spell syllables, and obtain magic by sacrificing to dimensional demons to complete their spells. As a foreigner, Shenyan quickly discovered something wrong. Do you call yourself a wizard without even magic? So he boldly began to make changes. He even succeeded, and no one expected him to succeed. After his improvements, the casting methods used by the current Taj mages have also changed significantly from before. Nowadays, they no longer need to borrow and pay a painful price. They only need to create magic through meditation and use their spiritual power to drive the operation of the magic. Fireball technique or fireball technique, even the formation has not changed, but there is no longer a need to communicate with the dimensional demon god. What else is there to communicate with? The creditor has become myself. However, despite this, the process of obtaining magic through meditation is extremely dangerous. Without prolonged practice or amazing talent, any step can lead to serious consequences. Mild cases can lead to becoming an idiot, severe cases can result in immediate death. Despite this, it cannot stop wizards from all over the world from coming to Kamar-Taj to learn one by one. No one can refuse this path. Great power belongs to oneself. As his expertise in magic grew, Shenyan did not stop there. He kept improving and inventing new spells, and in the process, he even gradually discovered the essence of magic. Magic, in the final analysis, is actually using strong willpower to influence, distort, and even change the world. Make the world submit to your feet. This is also the fundamental reason that truly disappointed him with the wizards of this world. They had already walked the thousands of years of journey of the Kamar-Taj mages, but suddenly stopped moving forward. They can clearly take one step forward, even further. It's just a small step. But no one stepped out. The wizards in this world are all children who have just learned to run. They all have talent, and the best of them may even possess a strong magical power. Unfortunately, this talent has been wasted, completely wasted. They could have become professional runners when they grew up. Talented individuals could even become bold, running to the shock of everyone and becoming synonymous with greatness, but now Shenyan looked up at the clear sky in the countryside of Europe and couldn't help but hesitate. Do I really want to do this? Do I really want to help them progress and forcibly change the course of the world as an outsider? They are satisfied with the status quo, and although I am not angry, this anger has no reason to come. He closed his eyes, intending to take a break and let go of this meaningless obsession, but a voice rang in his heart. That's not his voice. Please help them. The sound was fleeting, and Shenyan looked up in shock. Someone had bypassed the protective array he had set up and started a conversation with him directly in his heart. Who are you? The voice answered 2 seconds later, World Barrier, I have accepted you, outsiders, so I ask you to help them. They have taken the wrong path. The wizard was stunned. His instincts made him refuse to believe this, but his rationality began to make him verify the authenticity of the matter. He disappeared in place and appeared in the weak world barriers that he had observed early on. The lookout eye was released. In that dim horizon, the only weak spot that was illuminated began to slowly wriggle, and lines of words appeared on it. I ask you to help them, and I will help you cross over again. Shenyan fell silent. He couldn't think of any reason to refuse. After a moment, he nodded. And it's about doing whatever you say. He closed his eyes and no longer concealed his spiritual power. The half of his soul, which was still recovering from his disability, remained strong and swept the entire world in an instant. All those with magic in their bodies felt inexplicable palpitations at that moment. However, only those with high mana can realize that this is actually a message, an invitation. There are many ways to help, and the most efficient one may be to brainwash the spellcasters from all over the world and rudely force them to self-destruct, completely ignoring the danger of meditating alone. But if you ask him what he has learned from the more than 700 stinky and long history of magic from all over the world in Guyi's library, Shenyan will tell you one thing. Any mage who does not treat himself as a human and surpasses all sentient beings will end up in a miserable fate. After all, you were born human. End of this chapter. Chapter 4. From repairing stone bricks to going back in time. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 4. From repairing stone bricks to going back in time. Dumbledore. The famous Dumbledore sat at the head of the long table, and no one could tell any emotional fluctuations from his face. Of course, it could also be because his beard was too long, completely covering the lower half of his face. All the teachers at Hogwarts sat at this long table, their faces solemn, and no one spoke. Waiting for Dumbledore to speak. The atmosphere in the quaint room is somewhat stagnant. I believe everyone felt it 2 days ago. The old man spoke slowly, his voice full of vitality, and his speech was very clear. Contrary to his age. To be honest, I can't be sure who that is, or the magical fluctuations emanating from something. After our extensive discussions, careful speculation, and communication, we still cannot determine what exactly that is. However, one thing is certain. After talking to school principals and law enforcement agencies around the world, I can confirm that this phenomenon is global. However, beyond that, we still know nothing. He made a gesture. If you have any speculations here, why not speak up? We need to discuss and brainstorm, don't we? After a long pause, Dumbledore saw his long-time colleague, Professor Maliva McGonagall speaking. This lady is wearing a black pointed hat, and she looks dignified and elegant. She cleared her throat and said, I think it's a message, some kind of invitation. I can feel from that fluctuation that he has no ill intentions, at least for now. The adjective she uses is he, a term commonly used in the mystical realm to refer to deities. Madame Pomfrey also spoke, and her voice always made people feel her rigor. Although I cannot perceive the information within the fluctuations as clearly as Professor McGonagall, I have come to some conclusions after conducting a physical examination of all students in the school yesterday. She nodded solemnly at her colleagues and said, the fluctuation did not affect them. Even some little wizards had their magic level raised a bit due to that special tremor. Severus, what is your opinion? Dumbledore suddenly spoke up and asked the gloomy man sitting on his right side. This person has greasy black straight hair that grows behind his ears, and his entire body is dressed in black. Thanks to his appearance and attire, he gives a very oppressive feeling. Not only that, his voice did indeed match his own appearance, with a deep and strange precision. At least, it won't be him. As this sentence was coldly thrown out of his mouth, the temperature in the flickering candlelight conference room seemed to have dropped slightly. Except for Dumbledore and Severus speaking, everyone's faces changed. Dumbledore made another gesture, signaling him not to continue speaking. The old man stood up, his grey robe dragging on the ground. Dumbledore spoke again with an unwavering attitude, this time much more solemnly. Actually, everyone. I can feel the exact meaning of the message in that fluctuation. As Professor McGonagall said, that was indeed an invitation. The location is in Eston, France. I will set off tomorrow to explore there. The time is uncertain, and I hope everyone can fulfill their duties and manage all aspects of Hogwarts well during this period. He paused for a moment, his eyes not knowing what emotions were brewing. After a while, he continued speaking in a slow and terrifying tone. If I don't come back within a week, the principal's position will be handed over to Maliva McGonagall. He nodded to Professor McGonagall and then announced, the meeting is over. Everyone, please go rest, it's getting late. As this sentence was shouted out, the meeting came to an end and he seemed to have become more relaxed. The others walked out of the conference room in twos and threes, leaving only McGonagall, Severus, and Dumbledore, who was pulling out a pack of candy from somewhere and eating it, still in their original position. Are you really going? The person known as Severus suddenly asked with a gloomy expression. Of course, if someone invites you to go somewhere, how can you refuse? You can't be an impolite person. Dumbledore gave him a playful wink. Severus Snape turned his head and stood up and left without saying a word. Professor McGonagall looked at the old man with concern and said, but we don't know if it's him or another. Don't worry, Maliva. I have confirmed that my old friend is still staying well in Newmont Gaudry. And I don't think Tom has the strength either, otherwise he would be the one sitting here now. Dumbledore said with a lively smile. He doesn't seem to be worried at all. But the true idea is only known to himself. Professor McGonagall shook his head and stood up to leave. Only the old man with white hair and beard sat alone in the conference room eating candy. The expression remained indifferent. Dumbledore moves very quickly. The power of action is extremely terrifying. This old man, who is the most powerful white wizard of his time, brought his old wand early in the morning and used phantom shift to arrive at Eston. This beautiful countryside is located in the countryside of France, surrounded by mountains and water, with a charming environment. those quaint pointed houses have hardly been damaged and still retain their antique charm. He must admit that at first glance, he almost fell in love with this small place. However, he came here for a serious purpose, not for sightseeing. Dumbledore let go of his magic and began searching the village, only to discover a small mistake after the third attempt. Just like a strand of hair on a bedsheet, if you don't look carefully, you won't be able to tell. He walked towards that place step by step. The pedestrians coming and going on the street turned a blind eye to him. Allow the tall old man with a beard growing up to his waist to walk around freely. He arrived at the location and found it was at the entrance of a villa. He was about to reach out and ring the doorbell. I found that the scene in front of me suddenly changed and entered a void. The feeling here is like being in the center of the universe, surrounded by swirling stars that are enchanting and twinkling. Even Dumbledore was captivated by the sight for a while. He tried to cast a spell with his elder wand, but as soon as he took it out, the wand disappeared. A young voice said, "Ah, it's interesting. This is the first quite different enchantment wand I've seen." "Your Excellency." Dumbledore calmly prepared to cast the wandless spell, but the young voice laughed and opened up another topic. "Don't worry about this, sir. You're the first one to come here, and I want to congratulate you on that." His words left Dumbledore somewhat surprised and at the same time somewhat amused, as he didn't know what the person's intentions were. But soon, he noticed that the celestial bodies began to spin. The young voice spoke again. "Please forgive my slight rudeness, but that's just my personality. You successfully passed the deception and found here. You passed the first test, but there's still a second one." "Test?" Dumbledore smiled curiously. "After the test, there should be a reward." The speaker, "May I know if I have a reward? If so, I hope the reward is for my life and freedom." The young voice burst into laughter and said, "Sense of humor. A rare quality that remains calm and self-control in the face of unknown existence, a precious quality. All right, sir, do you want to know the reward after the test?" He became serious. "Rewards are a brand new path." As the words fell, the celestial body spun and flew towards him. Dumbledore was attracted to the spinning white star, and although he didn't want it to be, the inexplicable attraction was like honey, and he couldn't take his gaze away, and he didn't even know the reason. The scenery around him began to blur, and only the star remained in his eyes. In the next second, he found himself appearing again on an empty square floating in the sky. "Is this just like I said?" "It's just a small test, sir." A young man stood straight with his back to him, hands behind his back. He is very tall, with black hair tied into a ponytail that hangs down to the back of his head. "Did I pass?" "Yes, you passed." A thought came to Dumbledore's mind. He asked, "So, what if I don't pass?" The young man turned around and nodded at him with a mischievous smile, "I don't want to tell you." Pale, thin, and handsome, this was Dumbledore's first impression. In the second, he ignored all of this and stared fixedly at the young man's eyes. Those eyes it seems to contain starlight, and just a glance at it makes one feel like their soul is being sucked away. It seemed that he also noticed this, and the young man smiled helplessly. He snapped his fingers, and Dumbledore noticed a black shadow flashing between his fingers. He said gently, "I'm sorry, because this is the world of souls, the illusion I used on myself has failed." Dumbledore jokingly said, "So, are your eyes really like this?" "Ah, yes. With my progress in magic, my body has undergone some changes, and that's one of them. I had no choice but to release a long-lasting illusion on myself. Not to mention that, oh, I haven't asked your name yet." "My name is Shenyan, may I ask who you are?" "Albus Percival Wulfride Brian Dumbledore." "It's really long, but it's okay." Shenyan smiled and clapped his hands. The sunlight that was still overhead disappeared in an instant and turned into a pitch-black night without stars. He snapped his fingers again, causing a tile in the middle of the square to shatter. Thus, this peculiar meeting officially began. He pointed to the tile and asked, "Excuse me, Mr. Dumbledore, is there any way you can restore this broken tile without using a wand?" "I can give it a try." Out of courtesy, Dumbledore didn't say too confidently. He was full of confusion and extreme curiosity about the current situation, everything that the young man had shown himself. But at the same time, he also understood that this was not something that wizards could do. For a moment, Dumbledore even thought it was a divine joke. The tall and sturdy old man reached out his right hand, and magic was rapidly gathering in his hand. It had been a long time since he had tried to cast a basic spell so seriously. A few seconds later, he shouted, "Restore to the original." So, those broken bricks were rebuilt in their intact state. Shenyan applauded and nodded, saying, "Surprisingly, Mr. Dumbledore, you have done your best under limited conditions. However, I will reveal a completely different possibility for you." After he finished speaking, he casually pointed and saw that the floor tiles that had just been cast by Dumbledore had once again turned into shattered pieces. Dumbledore was shocked to find that it was not in any form of magic he knew. Shenyan noticed his shock and smiled, "It's not a big deal. Please take a look." Dumbledore looked carefully at his outstretched right hand, slender and powerful. With a casual flick of his finger, the same magic as when he restored it surged out, but what he did next made Dumbledore stare wide. He saw Shenyan use that tiny bit of magic to make the tile flow back in time in an instant. It first transformed into the appearance of Dumbledore after casting a spell, then into the appearance of Shenyan causing it to break with magic, and finally, became the appearance of it when it first appeared. There are no traces of magic left, just an ordinary floor tile. Dumbledore was stunned. "Do you understand?" Shenyan asked with a smile. "How did you do it? Please forgive my impoliteness." Dumbledore was a bit incoherent, and after noticing this, he tried to salvage his composure. But Shenyan didn't care about these things at all. He smiled and grabbed Dumbledore, and the two of them squatted down. Shenyan pointed to the piece of land and patiently explained, "The principle of the simple spell you just released is to use magic and will to make the object change back to the appearance of a certain moment in your memory. When I say that, you may not quite understand. Because it involves the essence of magic. However, when you use that spell, you should have seen many times the way it manifests, which is similar to the situation of going back in time, right?" Dumbledore nodded blankly. Shenyan continued, "That's right, that's the truth behind this spell. Mr. Dumbledore. And this is also what I want to reveal to you. Think about it, if you just use magic to make an object look like it's in your memory, it can produce a reaction similar to going back in time. So, why don't I just go back in time?" Shenyan raised his right hand and wrote a word with his index finger in the air, which was the restoration spell that Dumbledore had previously shouted when casting. He picked up the black magic spell and blended it together. A black magic ball appeared in his palm. He smashed another tile and threw the magic ball up. The black magic ball disappeared after a burst of light, and the floor tiles once again looked intact. He said again, "Look, even if you don't use those advanced techniques, I can simply change the mechanism of this spell, as long as you understand the essence of magic enough." Dumbledore looked up and looked at Shenyan in a daze. For a long time, he asked, "What is the essence of magic?" The wizard smiled and replied, "It's a miracle. Anything that cannot happen but happens is a miracle." He stood up holding Dumbledore, extended a hand, and made a gesture of wanting to shake hands. Dumbledore, however, did not immediately shake his hand. He still maintained his shocked expression and said, Sir, what do you mean?" He even subconsciously used honorific language. Shenyan raised his eyebrows and humorously said, "I want to teach at Your Excellency's Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. What do you think?" He returned the honorific again. After a moment, Dumbledore finally grasped his outstretched hand. "Please make sure to teach me," the old man said solemnly. End of this chapter. Chapter 5. What was the experience of teaching Dumbledore? Thank you for inviting me. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 5. What was the experience of teaching Dumbledore? Thank you for your invitation. 2 days had passed since that conversation, and Dumbledore was almost getting along with Shenyan as an apprentice. However, Dumbledore himself did not feel anything wrong. As a teacher, he was indeed an apprentice on this new path. The old man even felt that his energy had returned to his youth. He no longer cared about political considerations and intricate calculations, but simply studied and experienced the rhythm of every bit of magic. Just like now, he is learning what Shenyan calls the most basic meditation. He sat cross-legged, with a soft blanket serving as a cushion beneath him, and a special fragrance gradually drifting his thoughts into the clouds. Dumbledore heard the voice of Shenyan, as if in his ear, and as if in the distance. "You have been using a wand to cast spells before, so it may be difficult for you, but it's okay. As long as you master the free use of magic, you are like stepping into a door with half your foot. Now, please listen carefully. Relax." Dumbledore followed his instructions and completely relaxed his body, even surpassing sleep. "It's great, getting into a state quickly. But tomorrow you'll have to try to break free from the help of the potion and enter a completely empty state. Now, imagine yourself floating." He began to imagine that he was floating. As this thought emerged from the bottom of his heart, he felt a strange joy, as if he was in a dream, where everything around him was far away and the sounds around him became increasingly elusive. The scene gradually became full of fluorescence, and he was shocked to find himself floating in a white space with many fluorescent balls. "Very good, now tell me what you saw," Shenyan asked, his voice equally ethereal. Next, he heard his own voice, and the energy and excitement in it made him wonder. "Is this my voice? There is light everywhere. White dots of light, I am in a pure white space. Try to grab a spot of light. But don't use your hands, rely on thinking. As Shenyan said, he imagined it. He imagined that the closest spot to him was in his hand. A few seconds later, even though he hadn't reached out, the spot flew over on its own. "I caught it," Dumbledore said excitedly, almost at a loss. "Open your eyes," Shenyan said. So Dumbledore opened his eyes, and the vague and secure feeling disappeared. He was surprised to find a white magical spot in the palm of his hand. The old man laughed and even his wrinkles disappeared for it. This is magic. It's your magic. The space you just entered. No matter how you call it, the soul space, the Garden of Eden, the Kabbalah tree, the palace. It's all good, it's the storage place of magic within your body." Shenyan patiently explained, and even tapped his temple, saying, "Usually, magic is stored in the brain. Quantity complements the strength and willpower of your soul. As magic rises, your body will unconsciously become very close to your soul. This is also one of the greatest benefits of persistent meditation. Mages can no longer be afraid of demons, because demons no longer have the ability to take away a mage's soul. Our soul belongs only to ourselves, and we are completely free. Speaking of which," he blinked and said, "Of course, I don't know if there are demons here." Dumbledore looked at the soft ball of light in his hand, and he could feel the connection between this small ball of light and himself. He asked, "Are the wizards in the world you came from like you? What aspect are you referring to?" Dumbledore continued, "No, I mean, are they all as willing to teach knowledge as you are? Even if it's this kind of knowledge. Not even asking for anything in return." "Of course not." When it came to this issue, Shenyan came to his senses and laughed. In fact, before the 7th century AD, mages were still hiding that knowledge from others. The related knowledge of casting spells was usually passed down from family, but if a son or daughter had no talent, they would also write a book and take it to the grave. A person who has the ability to use protective spells and dig them out, if they happen to have that talent, they can also learn. After the 17th century, the situation has been different. My teacher became the supreme mage. A position similar to that of a guardian of the world. She traveled around the world, uniting the loose mages. After that, we shared knowledge and helped each other. Of course, that's how it is said, you understand. Shenyan smiled and waved his hand. A thick classic appeared in the air. He glanced at the cover of Dumbledore's book, Fundamentals of Soul Experiments and High-End Applications, and then dispersed it. Anyway, if it weren't for her, I wouldn't have seen these precious antiques. And magic wouldn't progress either. No matter how talented a person may be, if they were to work behind closed doors, they wouldn't be as good as a group of people, right? His words made Dumbledore exclaim, and he remembered some similar things. Perhaps only in this aspect do humans have a common language. No matter which world, there will always be differences in doors and mutual contempt. He sighed. Within 2 days, he started with the construction theory of magic, and then went on to combine his spirit and will. Until today, through meditation and the use of magic, in just 2 days, he has fully mastered valuable knowledge that may have taken thousands of years from another world. A sense of heaviness rushed towards me. Alright, the break is almost over. If you're interested in the history of magic in my world, I can give you a few books when this crash course ends, so you can read them yourself. As for now, get ready, Mr. Dumbledore. I'm going to teach you how to use your will to influence the real world. It may be a bit painful. Pain. Dumbledore didn't understand his meaning for a moment until Shenyan slapped him on the forehead. The massive magic directly took his soul out of his body. With a sharp pain, he watched in shock as his body remained in place, even sitting cross-legged, breathing slowly. Is this? Am I dead? How could it be, Mr. Dumbledore? And even if you're really dead, I have a way to bring you back. Shenyan shook his head. I just want you to see this process from the perspective of the soul, so that you can see it more clearly. By the way, let me reveal a little more knowledge. The soul's eye can usually see more things than the naked eye, and everything is the same. He extended his right hand, and the black magic converged into a ball in his palm. Shenyan reminded him, look clearly. As his words fell, the ball gradually twisted and deformed in his palm, and 1 minute later, it became a piece of bread. Shenyan took a bite and nodded in satisfaction. Not bad, the taste is good. This spell is the foundation of a series of transformation spells, you can call it bread making. Sometimes during Christmas when I'm bored, I dress up like Jesus and go out to share bread with the homeless. His sudden sense of humor left Dumbledore dumbfounded. As for the key points, you need to fully understand the bread's making method, taste, flavor. Of course, it doesn't matter if you don't know the taste, you just need to think that this thing can fill your stomach, but the final product may be bland and tasteless. You need to rely on your spirit and will to drive magic, and use your imagination to turn magic into bread. After mastering it, you can also try to change something else, anything is fine. As long as you succeed for the first time, the operation principle and magical flow of this spell will be engraved in your mind. At that time, you don't need to deliberately imagine it. With just a wave of your hand, you can transform bread. But for more advanced ones, it's necessary to memorize the spell model and related formations. This is how magic that doesn't require preparation works. After he finished speaking, he took the remaining half of the bread and casually sent Dumbledore's soul back to his body, saying, "Now, you come and try it. Whatever you like to eat." Dumbledore followed his promise and even felt a bit eager to give it a try. It's like a newly boarded driving school student. The soft white ball in his hand only moved a little after 5 minutes, and fine beads of sweat had already sprouted from Dumbledore's forehead. Shenyan did not urge or speak up. He just patiently watched his first formal student's hard work. Who hasn't cast the spell for the first time yet? The first time is always very difficult. Encouragement and patience are the right path. 10 minutes later, the light ball transformed into a small strip. At 15 minutes, Dumbledore had already started sweating profusely. His eyes widened behind the crescent lenses, biting his teeth. And the light ball finally turned into a small white candy. Very good, let's taste it. A smile bloomed on Shenyan's face, and he suddenly felt a sense of achievement. Dumbledore took a breath and threw the candy into his mouth. The familiar smell made him burst into laughter, and the old man's smile was now innocent and unrestrained like a child. It seems that I haven't eaten sugar for free after all these years. Shenyan pulled him up from the ground, made a gesture, and the basement door opened. Now, go take a break. The mind needs to recover, and long-term casting can lead to some small problems. Fatigue is one of the most obvious symptoms. When you feel tired, stop casting unless you have to, understand? Dumbledore nodded and went upstairs to the yard to bask in the sun. As he walked out of the basement, Shenyan snapped his fingers again. He took out a blank book with the cover of A Complete Collection of Novice Spells, and began to use magic to compile it. End of this chapter. Chapter 6. Show everyone how to solve Voldemort within one chapter. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 6. Show everyone how to solve Voldemort within one chapter. Dumbledore was basking in the sun, and the afternoon sunlight was not as intense as noon. However, it also made the elderly at his age particularly comfortable, and even a bit drowsy. He hasn't studied so simply for a long time and has taken a break. I'm usually busy with various affairs. Wait, have I forgotten something? Dumbledore, who was originally lying on the recliner with his eyes closed, suddenly opened his eyes. He remembered that today was already the third day and that he should have called Hogwarts back after investigating the situation. But he remembered that there was no fireplace in this villa, and it was somewhat difficult to pass the message to Hogwarts in England through the patron saint in France. Thinking of this, he simply stood up and returned to the basement. His teacher. Although he had never addressed Shenyan that way, the two seemed to have agreed to this. A classic book was floating in front of Shenyan. Seeing him coming, Shenyan put away the book. He asked, "What's up?" Dumbledore explained the situation once, and the wizard nodded. "It's simple. Let's go back to your school together. Coincidentally, it's time for me to take office, isn't it?" The old man laughed. They walked out of the villa door, and Dumbledore stood empty-handed on the open space in front of the villa door, clapping his hands as Shenyan watched. The country villa that had been living for 2 days disappeared and its original place became a small forest. Noticing Dumbledore's gaze, Shenyan explained, "This is a simple spell under the travel spell column. Once I compile my book, you will be able to understand it." Book? Yeah, there should always be textbooks in class, right? I'm starting to look forward to it, Dumbledore said, taking out his wand. Shall we use the phantom to teleport back? Phantom teleportation. Oh. You're talking about that slightly dangerous teleportation spell, right? Let me show you a more interesting one, how about it? Shenyan deliberately slowed down the speed. His right hand casually drew a circle in the air with one hand, and he even deliberately made Dumbledore feel the flow of magic. As he moved, a circular arc gradually appeared in the air, like a mirror, shining with a black magical radiance. He placed one hand on Dumbledore and said, "Now think about your school, what is it called?" Dumbledore said, "Hogwarts." So, the black center of the arc slowly changed color, unfolded, and the scenery inside became the place where the old man had spent most of his life, his school, the main teaching building of Hogwarts. Now, go in. When passing through the door, be careful not to have any conflicting thoughts, otherwise it may cause you to leave something behind the door. Shenyan said tactfully and walked in with Dumbledore. Passing through the portal, they returned to Hogwarts in the blink of an eye. In front of me is the gate of Hogwarts. There are many students walking or sitting together by the grassland and lake, either in groups of 3 or 2, talking. They didn't notice a tall stranger and their familiar principal standing in front of the open door. Dumbledore was particularly surprised. Even envious. He didn't feel the uncomfortable feeling of phantom shape-shifting, like being squeezed out of a rubber pipe. There was no such harsh popping sound either. In fact, it's like walking out on a leisurely afternoon to prepare for a walk. It's too easy. Returning to school, Dumbledore had some special qualities. His back became even straighter, and there was no need for him to say anything carefully. Dumbledore led him forward. They walked through the heavy and exquisite oak door, facing a very luxurious marble staircase. On the right is a double door, as Dumbledore introduced, which is the auditorium. It is a place for students and professors to eat, as well as a place for the annual branch ceremony for new students. The separation ceremony. Shenyan's eyes lit up. He is always greedy for various magical knowledge. Ah, yes. We have a little thing called the sorting hat. Wearing it will read out each person's personality traits, which can help us group them into students with similar personalities. There are 4 colleges in total. These 4 colleges are named after the founders' surnames, Gryffindor, Heckapack, Ravenclaw, and Slytherin. He explained and walked up the stairs with Shenyan. The wizard nodded, and the passing students saw the principal touring the campus with a handsome stranger and personally introducing him to Hogwarts' various past. They all ran away excitedly. Only the older ones would guess that he might be an adult wizard from abroad, with a high position and authority, so they all greeted him. Shenyan also accepted all the orders. He will soon be their teacher, so why not? And Dumbledore, he didn't have to think about it. Tonight, there might be another long period of commotion during dinner, and this news would spread explosively among the students at that time. He smiled helplessly and continued on with the tour guide work that he also enjoyed very much. He truly loved this ancient castle, which witnessed his entire life. They walked up to the 2nd floor, and the activity murals and strange floating stairs hanging along the way made Shenyan laugh. He said, "It seems that both wizards and wizards in my world have strange tastes in these places." Dumbledore also laughed and said, "This castle is so ancient that even as the principal, I cannot control all aspects of it. In these small details, let it go." After walking down a hallway, Dumbledore knocked on a door with him. A lady's voice rang out inside the door, "Please come in." So Dumbledore pushed open the door and introduced him to Shenyan, saying, "Maliva McGonagall, the Dean of Gryffindor College. My good friend, colleague, and also a reliable person." The lady sitting behind the desk writing something stood up in surprise, looking at the principal and this handsome stranger. A warm fireplace was burning in the fireplace behind her. Although the room is small, it is full of warmth. "Hello, Ms. McGonagall. My name is Shenyan, you can call me he. We will become colleagues for a period of time in the future." Shenyan politely smiled at her and extended his right hand. From his appearance, he could tell that this lady must be a serious and reliable person, and her attire, standing posture, and even the neat handwriting on the parchment roll placed on the table could prove this. This inevitably gave him some favorable impression. Mages have always liked people like this. Professor McGonagall walked out from behind her desk and glanced at Dumbledore. She politely smiled and shook hands with Shenyan, saying, "Hello, Mr. He, I didn't know you were here." Dumbledore smiled somewhat ill-intently, usually showing some stubbornness when facing old friends. "This is my teacher." He was satisfied to see that the expression on Meg's face quickly transformed into shock and, "You're definitely joking with me." Dumbledore didn't stop as soon as he saw the improvement. He intensified and even nodded seriously, saying, "You heard me right, Maliva. This is indeed my teacher. Please inform the other teachers that we will have a short meeting in the conference room at 6 p.m. I will explain it then. Leaving Professor McGonagall nodding his head in a trance, Dumbledore continued to visit Hogwarts with Shenyan. He pointed to the lawn outside the landing window and said, "The view from here is very good, isn't it?" Shenyan touched his chin and said, "Well, personally speaking, it might be better if there were some other embellishments." "What is it?" "Well, you won't like it, believe me, Dumbledore." Shenyan smiled and skipped the topic. His magical plants are each more terrifying in appearance. The material of the magic potion should also have an ugly appearance. The two of them walked up the third floor and, as they passed by the office of the Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher, Shenyan took the initiative to stop here. He frowned and asked, that might be a bit impolite. But what are the recruitment standards for Dumbledore and Hogwarts? What are you referring to? Dumbledore was somewhat puzzled. Shenyan shook his head out of courtesy. He scanned the entire school with his own mind before he arrived, and it was only because of this that he discovered the putrid magical aura on the person inside. At this point, he simply stopped suppressing himself and began to exert full pressure on the person inside. In an instant, a muffled groan came from behind the door, followed by the sound of something falling to the ground. Dumbledore pushed open the door, and his expression almost froze when he saw the back of the man lying on the ground. I couldn't speak for a moment. Shenyan stood next to him and asked, "Forgive me for taking action without asking you. But the stench on this guy's body makes me very sure he's not on the same side as you." "Yes, yes." Dumbledore raised and lowered his trembling right hand, and after a moment, he finally remembered where his glasses were. He took off his glasses, rubbed his brows, sighed, and said, "This is a former student of mine named Tom Riddle. I mean this one on the back of his head. He was very outstanding in school, but unfortunately he took the wrong path. He launched a large-scale terrorist attack throughout Britain, attempting to take control of the entire world. We paid a very painful price, and after defeating him, he disappeared. What I didn't expect was that he could sneak into the school." Dumbledore spoke about these past histories, looking much older and more relaxed, as if he had shed some burden. After listening to him finish speaking, Shenyan rarely made a comment. However, his gaze on that inhuman face was somewhat disdainful. Then, he lightly snapped his fingers. The man lying on the ground immediately woke up. He crawled up, looked at Dumbledore in terror, and even touched the back of his bald head. A voice cursed, "Fool! What are you touching?" Master, Dumbledore is here." He looked like he was about to faint, and Dumbledore sighed again. He said, "Please turn around, Mr. Quirrell." Quirrell was not frightened by the curses from that voice, nor did he obey his obstruction and orders to pull out his wand. He chose to obey Dumbledore's gentle commands. Quirrell trembled as he turned around. An ugly face was moving on the back of his head. He has slender crimson eyes, with flames of resentment burning inside. His nose is flat, just 2 cracks apart. Speaking coldly like a snake spitting out a message. "Dumbledore, what are you waiting for? Let's do it." All the emotions that Dumbledore had previously exposed were restrained. He stood straight there, fearless of this terrifying face, pulling out his wand without casting a spell. He just said a faint sentence, even with a hint of pity in his tone. "Tom, you really don't need to go this far." The person he called Tom. Or his face roared out, "Enough. You hypocritical old fool. Take action. What are you still pretending to say there?" "I think it's better not to take action yet." Shenyan suddenly spoke out. He squinted his eyes and looked at this humanoid, ugly creature, speaking astonishingly. "You are truly admirable for your courage, Mr. Tom Riddle. You dare to rashly split your soul and divide it into several equally conscious beings, even though you have only a partial understanding of it. Your courage is admirable, but it is truly foolish." Tom widened his crimson, slender eyes, so angry that he could only utter a few blurry words. "How dare you? How dare you? His focus turned out to be on foolish evaluations. Of course I dare, Mr. Tom Riddle. Look at you now, do you dare to say you're not? You're not just stupid, what's the difference between your current form of existence and parasites? Shenyan gave a mocking smile, but he quickly lost this interest. He raised his hand, snapped his fingers, and simply sealed Tom's mouth with magic. Then he casually pointed and a black beam of light hit the face. Tom Riddle grew up in a silent scream. A few seconds later, he flowed down Quirrell's head like a piece of paper. But Quirrell fainted on the spot and fell to the ground again, with a broken nose and blood flowing all over the ground. Shenyan glanced at the poor person and released a hemostatic spell. An accomplice with no choice, an unlucky helper. He may be guilty, but sin does not lead to death. Furthermore, there is no need to demand that everyone choose to sacrifice their lives for justice in the face of life and death. Yes, in just such a short while, he had already flipped through Quirrell's memories and learned how Tom Riddle was intimidating and tempting him. Dumbledore walked forward, picked up Tom Riddle, who was silently cursing like a skin, and looked at the wizard with inquiry. The latter only sighed. That's it, Dumbledore. I believe you have some other uses for him, right? After tonight's meeting, let's discuss about learning again. Now, you can go ahead and don't mind me. I'll take a look myself. Dumbledore nodded and left. He really needs to do something at this moment, such as calling the Ministry of Magic to announce that Voldemort, who has been on the run for a long time, has been caught, locking Quirrell in Azkaban, interrogating Voldemort, or using magic to locate his Horcruxes, and so on. Even if Shenyan doesn't say it, he will still say he wants to leave for a while, and since Shenyan is so reasonable, he is happy to go by himself. The wizard simply turned around and left. To be honest, he quite liked this castle. The magic above is very ancient, outdated is one thing, but the idea is very interesting. Unconsciously strolling, he arrived all the way to the 8th floor. End of this chapter. Chapter 7. Strolling and Certain Thoughts. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7. Strolling and Certain Thoughts. Almost no one noticed him. Shenyan now only wants to stroll around on his own, so he has used some special tricks to make his presence very low. I know, some people want to learn this little trick and use it in abnormal places. Go back to the main topic. If he were to give this ancient castle a rating, he would give it 85. Very great. Not to mention the grand and elegant architectural style of this castle, the exquisite yet understated decoration inside also suits his taste. Of course, he also noticed the ghosts wandering freely within the castle, with their own conscious portraits and living sculptures. To be honest, these things are not uncommon. He himself knows many ways to put the souls of living people into portraits and sculptures for easy torture, as well as spells to turn souls into ghosts. But none of the creations in this castle are like this, they were not created by malicious means. This is very interesting. The ghost not created by negative energy and the portrait without a living soul inside, in his view, is as precious and interesting as a cat eating with its butt. If you are a biologist, you would probably immediately want to study this cat that is born to eat with its butt. The wizard couldn't help but marvel at the fact that he had chosen to embark on the right path home. Not only could he gradually find his home, but he could also witness new magic and scenery in the process. What could be better than this? Koichi once joked that he was a person with a thirst for magical knowledge, and he agreed with this. He paused for a moment in front of a tapestry called Giant Monster Stick Beats Silly Barnabas, then turned his head to look at the wall opposite this tapestry. Out of some courtesy, he did not study the magic that looked like folding space without authorization, but continued to move forward. In the next half hour, except for the students' towers and some professors' offices, he basically wandered around this ancient castle. He ultimately chose to stay in front of an open window, overlooking the grass, trees, and the large lake below. My heart is filled with an inexplicable joy. Great, let's start from here. Dumbledore had already carried Tom Riddle's phantom to the Ministry of Magic. Not to mention the ordinary staff who were about to faint when they saw the piece of skin in his hand, even the Minister of Magic, Connolly Fudge, was not much better. He pulled out a silk handkerchief and wiped the sweat off his face, looking at the tall old man with a weak smile on his face. My respected Dumbledore, may I ask, what is this? Dumbledore didn't show any disdainful expression, he just made a simple gesture to Fudge to calm down, and then placed Tom Riddle on the table. The existence of the Black Demon King with a skin seemed to make Fuji nervous, as he almost slid off the chair. As Dumbledore watched his whole body sweat more and more, he had to explain, "Dear Fudge, can't you see it? This is the Voldemort we've been looking for many years." He deliberately said the name, and Voldemort's pie immediately began silently cursing again. In fact, he never stopped, but no one could hear him and could only guess based on his lip shape. Fuji immediately sat up straight. Not because of excitement, but because of fear. He immediately pulled out his wand and pointed it at Voldemort, struggling to make a very courageous appearance, while starting to shout out Aurora loudly. Political achievements. While waiting for Aurora to arrive, he also asked if Dumbledore could also call the journalist, with ambiguous permission. Fuji's joy is obvious. It will be a very impressive achievement for him. However, Dumbledore surprisingly did not experience significant emotional fluctuations. He feels an unprecedented sense of relaxation now. Throughout his life, the first half was entangled with one Black Demon King, and the second half was entangled with another. The old one has been in prison for decades now, and the young one has actually been found in Hogwarts after 10 years of escape. Feeling relieved, he now has nothing else in his heart and just wants to finish the work quickly. After dealing with Fuji and the reporter with extremely fast speed and absent-minded attitude, he pulled Fuji aside, his face changed, and he became serious. "Dear Fuji, I know you're going to do something with him, but he hasn't been completely solved yet. Do you understand? You can spread the news of his arrest and see if there are any Death Eaters who haven't given up yet to rob the scene, but I need him to live. Temporarily." After Dumbledore finished speaking, he stopped looking at Fudge and didn't explain anything to him. He walked towards Fuji's fireplace and disappeared into it in a burst of flames. And the Minister of Magic. After being in a daze for a while, he finally came to his senses and walked back to his desk with a smile on his face, intending to open a bottle of wine for himself to celebrate. At 6 o'clock that evening, Professor McGonagall saw Dumbledore pushing open the door in the conference room. Behind him followed the young man he had seen in the afternoon. Professor Trelawney, who was sitting opposite her, immediately let out a short cry of surprise, and then lay on the table, his face so pale that it seemed like he was about to faint. Professor Flavia next to her helped her up, preventing her from losing face in front of the guests. As for the famous ghost professor, Mr. Binns, he didn't even come. Even if Professor McGonagall spent a long time this afternoon finding him in a corner of the castle and notifying him, it was the same. Mrs. Hodge and Professor Sinister were quite interested in this handsome man. Only Snape still had that half-dead expression, he seemed indifferent to anything. Dumbledore and Shenyan walked into the conference room. He didn't introduce Shenyan first, but said, "Please allow me to announce two things to you first. The shame of our school, the infamous Voldemort, was discovered by Mr. He at 4 p.m. He somehow possessed the body of defense against the dark arts Professor Quirina's quarrel. Forgive me, this slow old man, for not discovering him, but fortunately, our good gentleman discovered him. This way, we won't let Voldemort teach our students. He has been taken to the Ministry of Magic, and by tomorrow at the latest, everyone will be able to see a report about this matter in the newspaper." Professor McGonagall felt a wave of dizziness, with both the joy of Voldemort being caught and the fear of what Dumbledore had said. The other professors began to discuss quietly. Only Snape, his waxy yellow face turned pale with an abnormal blush, his hands tightly clenched under the table. The second thing is that our school will undergo reforms and adopt a completely new teaching method. After saying these words, he playfully blinked and turned his head to look at Shenyan beside him. It's your turn to play. Shenyan smiled and prepared to speak. Late at night, Professor McGonagall sat in her office, restless. At this usual time, she should be diligently correcting her homework. But now, she has no such thoughts at all. All she thinks about is the miracle that the man showed at the meeting. Miracle. There is no other way to describe it besides miracles. The magic used by wizards is vastly different from the simple basic spells he casually uses at the beginning. Snape was very skeptical of the notion of a different world, thinking that Dumbledore had become confused and believed in a quack. Until they were all illuminated by the white star, he could no longer speak and remained in a state of restlessness throughout. Professor McGonagall only then noticed something. She had been staring at the table for more than half an hour, and she reluctantly put down her quill, intending to change clothes, take a shower, and go to bed. But it may be difficult to fall asleep. She is already like this at her age, let alone being stimulated like this. She was actually looking forward to tomorrow at this moment. She didn't know if her other colleagues would do the same, but she knew that this would mean a huge change for the whole world. The way of casting spells and the control over magic simply captivated her. And Snape was standing outside the principal's office at the moment, showing some unease, which was rare in him. Dumbledore walked out, nodded at him, and greeted him, Severus. Snape didn't even notice him coming out for the first time. After hearing the sound, he lifted his head and pulled Dumbledore's sleeve. At first, he didn't even say anything. Are you telling the truth? He was caught. Dumbledore looked at him and nodded slowly and forcefully. Snape stumbled back a few steps, only to find the Phoenix standing on Dumbledore's shoulder, holding a black suitcase in his hand. Snape asked, "What are you?" "Oh, you said that. I don't plan on becoming the principal anymore." "What?" Dumbledore was very satisfied to see Snape show a shocked expression, and with that classic prank smile, he said, "I'm just joking, I'm just moving somewhere. My office is planned to be used as a place for teachers to attend classes for the next month. Wait until the official start of the school year and then return. After all, students also have to attend classes. At least before the end of this semester, they still have to take those exams." Snape nodded and licked his dry lips, hesitating as he asked, Mr. Is he inside?" Dumbledore knew what he wanted to ask, so he simply nodded and said, "Of course, he should be studying inside." After saying these words, Dumbledore knocked on the brass handle of the eagle lion's head on the door, allowing it to sleep before leaving Snape standing alone. In the dim corridor, the candlelight in front of the principal's office illuminated half of his face. That usually expressionless and indifferent face is now filled with hope. He slowly pushed open the door that anyone could enter because his hand was dormant, and his heart was filled with complex emotions that he couldn't even explain. End of this chapter. Chapter 8. About Resurrection and the First Class. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 8. About Resurrection and the First Class. Shenyan certainly heard the sound of opening the door and slow footsteps coming from behind. He was not surprised by Snape's arrival, he had seen such people many times, especially Dumbledore, who indirectly reminded him. It seems that in every world, British people like to beat around the bush. Snape entered the room and found that the space had become more than 5 times larger than before. The portraits of former principals have disappeared, and Dumbledore's desk, which was filled with various miscellaneous items, has also disappeared. Only the walls and floors still retain their original colors. There was nothing else, just an empty room. He saw the man standing in the center of the room with his back facing him. He walked in and loudly said, "Mr. Do you remember me? We met this afternoon, and I'm Severus Snape. I came here to ask you regarding resurrection and the like, right?" Shenyan replied without even turning around. If Snape was struck by lightning, anyone who was poked and buried in his heart for more than a decade would not be better off. However, he could only nod silently. Shenyan finally turned around. He was holding a book in his hand, flipping through it. On the thick brown cover, there was a line of small characters with the words, "Complete Standard Spells," written in floral script. One book was even stronger than the 6. He casually said while flipping through the book, "Of course it's possible. This kind of thing is not difficult for mages." However, the mage raised his head and didn't say the second half of a sentence, lengthening his voice. "Here he is going to make a request." Snape's heart trembled, but it was only natural to have the conditions. A brand new, better, and more advanced way of casting spells and even magic that can resurrect the deceased. It's strange that there are no conditions. He is even prepared to do whatever he says with caution, even if he kills Dumbledore. But what he didn't expect was that Shenyan only raised a question. He looked up and said, "Why did you bother the deceased?" After a long silence, Snape struggled to speak. He tried hard to make his mouth clear, but the harder he tried, the more he failed. His tongue was like a rusty nickel in his mouth. Because she died unexpectedly, she shouldn't have died like that. And she was very brave. She died to protect her daughter. She. He spoke slower and clearer. As if every word had to exert all one's strength. Moreover, I still owe her an apology. I won't help you. As expected. Snape lowered his head, his long, untrimmed fingernails piercing into his palm, bleeding profusely. But I will teach you, you are very talented. It depends on how much you can learn in this month. After a month, I will still be teaching students, and the progress will be mainly based on them. Snape seemed to suddenly lift his head, his face full of joy, and his expression changed at a speed comparable to some ancient skill. Shenyan said calmly, "Don't be too happy, Mr. Snape. I have requirements for students. Especially for those of you who are talented, they may be even more strict. My personal suggestion is that you should be better prepared." He deliberately paused and said, "And it's best to do a good job in personal hygiene. It's best to take a shower every day, Mr. Snape." Shenyan even joked humorously, "I think that lady also hopes to resurrect herself as a clean man, right?" Snape didn't fall asleep that night. In fact, since that day, it has been difficult for him to fall asleep peacefully again. Sometimes he goes to bed very early, but is awakened by nightmares in the middle of the night. In the dream, there was Voldemort laughing wildly, lying in a pool of blood. Snape wanted to take out his wand and cast a spell on Voldemort, but he couldn't even move. Sometimes it's even harder, and even sleepless all night. As soon as you close your eyes, it's her. The guilt in his heart increases day by day, as does the love he receives without any response. This kind of condemnation from conscience will gradually devour a person. And today, even though he had the opportunity to turn everything around, he still couldn't fall asleep. His heart was filled with those green eyes. Once upon a time, on Snape's most beautiful days, they would gaze at each other. He had seen the entire universe in those eyes, a poetic universe, a universe he had never possessed. The poem is too beautiful to be repeated. Even unable to remember. The man who never easily expresses his emotions gazed at the pure white moonlight spilled by the bed, and he began to silently shed tears, crying silently in the darkness. The next day at 8:45, Shenyan was already dressed neatly and waiting for his students in the former principal's office and now the magic classroom. He applied the same set of magic he used to Dumbledore to others yesterday, and the effect was significant. He was very satisfied. At exactly 9 o'clock, everyone is here. The existing teachers at Hogwarts are all standing in this empty room. Except for Professor Binns who couldn't come due to personal reasons and Professor Trelawney who refused to come no matter what, they all arrived. Shenyan snapped his fingers, and chairs and tables that matched the number of people appeared in the empty room. He made a gesture and smiled, gesturing for the students to go and sit down. Although it may seem strange to teach a group of teachers who are several times older than oneself, Shenyan is willing to teach as long as they are willing to learn. He does not believe that sharing knowledge is a sin. And furthermore, they have all passed the test. After they all sat down, a floating blackboard appeared behind Shenyan. The black magic formed a pen behind him, automatically starting to write, which was about the theory of the basic connection between spirit and soul, as well as some basic meditation preparation knowledge. Severus Snape was wearing a brand new black outfit, even with his hair cut short and his beard shaved clean. He was holding an obviously newly purchased cowhide notebook, using a feather pen to write vigorously on it. He didn't want to miss a single word on the blackboard, and even copied the title completely. McGonagall stood beside him speechless for a moment, thinking to himself, "Have you ever been so serious when you were still studying back then?" The first class lasted for a total of 1.5 hours without any rest. And Flivy even seemed somewhat unsatisfied. This small man had an unimaginable energy in his body, especially when exposed to this new knowledge, that energy would burst out completely. He is the one with the fastest progress, not even Dumbledore, which surprised Shenyan a bit. He immediately felt a slight improvement in his teaching progress towards Flavia. After the first class, there is a total of 20 minutes of rest time for them to digest the knowledge they have just learned. However, this little time is definitely not enough for them to fully understand and digest, just like Severus Snape now, sitting in his seat with his face propped up in contemplation, staring silently at the neat handwriting on his cowhide notebook. Shenyan walked forward and patted Snape, saying, "If there's anything you don't understand, you can ask a question at any time, Mr. Severus." Snape lifted his head in a daze as he looked at the young man, then pointed to a passage in the cowhide notebook and asked, "I don't quite understand this passage, Mr. The union between the soul and the body is quite close, even death may not be able to separate them, unless a devil takes them to hell. Or angels take them to heaven. Will the souls of the deceased always sleep in their bodies?" After thinking for a moment, Shenyan replied, "Most of the time, that's the case. In your world, I haven't found any traces of heaven and hell. You can consider it 100%. That is to say, yes." Snape's body shook. Shenyan knew the reason, and he did not disturb the man who had become helpless due to the approaching hope. This is human nature. He has already begun to consider how to start the next class. End of this chapter. Chapter 9. Snape knocks on the door of number 4 Privet Drive. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 9. Snape knocks on the door of number 4 Privet Drive. The first day of the course can be considered a perfect conclusion. Everyone's enthusiasm for learning is very high, and their progress is also fast, which surprised Shenyan a bit. However, considering that these people are already wizards, it is not surprising that they learn magic faster than ordinary people who were first exposed to it in the world before. He was currently sitting in the empty principal's office, with Dumbledore sitting cross-legged not far from him, tightly closing his eyes and breathing slowly and forcefully. He lay on a warm blanket, and the white magical radiance rhythmically emanated from him. Snape was looking at Dumbledore not far away. He was so focused, as if every breath of Dumbledore during meditation was worth recording. Shenyan sat on the other side, lying in a comfortable and spacious chair, looking at the complete collection of standard spells. On the ground beside him was a tattered, patched pointed hat with a blurry face in the middle. The famous hat was chattering incessantly at this moment. "Can't you put me on a chair? The ground is a bit too cold, young man. Don't you have any basic respect for me? I am the most magical hat in the world." Shenyan yawned, not even looking at the dirty hat. The oil stains on the hat could even reflect light, as if it had never been cleaned for centuries. He said slowly, "No, this is the punishment you said I should go to Azkaban." He flipped through a page of the book and suddenly smiled, "I'm actually curious. You've survived as a hat that tests people's personalities for centuries. Don't you find it boring? The branch hat remained silent for a considerable period of time. It can read the mind and has the intelligence and talent of the 4 founders of Hogwarts, making it one of the smartest magical items that most wizards and witches can see throughout their lives. So, it fully understands what this young man is implying. It finally spoke with difficulty. What you are about to do to the wizarding world is unprecedented, which could lead to a very bad outcome. Actually, I need to correct you a bit. Shenyan suddenly became interested. He knew why he had to say he should go to Azkaban when he put on the hat, because he saw some of the ideas he had deliberately released. But he doesn't care. He smiled faintly and said, I didn't do those things, did I? Moreover, it all depends on human factors, isn't it? What I am about to do to this world is truly unprecedented. Because it is a change. A change that represents progress. He stood up straight, stared at the dirty surface of the branch hat, and waved. The sorting hat flew in front of him and heard his joyful voice. Dumbledore had already taken the time to visit the Ministry of Magic this afternoon and informed them that Hogwarts will completely change its teaching methods and curriculum in the new academic year. If even your principal agrees with my idea, what else can you do? You're just a hat. He rotated the branch hat in the air once, and a black magic appeared out of thin air, cleaning its surface fresh. The originally brown black hat now appears to have turned white, which is enough to prove how dirty it is. The mage who saw this scene finally had an undisguised disgust in his eyes. He put the sorting hat back on the ground and said, as a hat, you can only watch me change everything. Finally, whether it's good or bad, it's up to you to see. After saying these words, he paid no attention to the silent branch hat. Continuing to read the book. The following period of time was very peaceful. Shenyan has praised Flavia's efforts and talent more than once in class, he is the one who learns the fastest. With the passage of time, they have all become proficient in meditation. Snape was the most difficult one among them, he had to rely on magic potions more than once to calm his mind. He seems to have been unable to really calm down. Time gradually arrived on August 30th, and Shenyan gave them 2 days off. September 1st is the beginning of the new semester at Hogwarts, which involves a series of complicated tasks such as attracting new students, guiding them to move in from the branch, and so on. Shenyan plans to assign Dumbledore and his team to be responsible for the students who progress from 2nd grade to new students, and take charge of the new students themselves. Meditation and basic knowledge are a crucial part of magic, and he needs to do it himself to be at ease. If something goes wrong, he won't forgive himself. Since we have taken on this responsibility, we must do it to the end and do our best. The faculty and staff have all gone to prepare, while he himself is sitting in the former principal's office, continuing to write his books. Snape knocked on the door of Dumbledore's new office. After receiving permission, he walked in and nervously tidied up his black suit. Dumbledore smiled awkwardly and said, "You look very good, Severus." "Snape does look very good." He combed his cut hair and shaved his beard clean. Even used aftershave water that was obtained from somewhere unknown. At this moment, wearing a fitted suit, he looks more like an elite on Wall Street than a wizard. He took a deep breath, picked up the black suitcase Dumbledore had prepared for him, and said, "I'm leaving now to pick her up." "You don't have to be like that." "I persist." Dumbledore shrugged his shoulders. In a wave of magic, Snape opened the portal and left. Dumbledore sat behind his desk and shook his head. He took off his crescent-shaped glasses and smiled silently at the scenery outside the window. Number 4 Privet Drive. Snape appeared in this peaceful community, the portal completely different from the phantom shift, without making any sound. He had thought about this day countless times, but when it arrived, he still felt very nervous. He swallowed his saliva and instinctively licked his lips. I walked forward and knocked on the door. "Who is it?" A fat man opened the door and looked like a pig, Snape thought. This man's facial features are squeezed together by fat, with another layer of chin hanging from his chin. Just standing there gives people a feeling of effort. The man glanced at Snape and suddenly changed into a smiling face, his tone becoming gentler. "Hello, sir, may I ask what's up with you?" "Harry Potter." He spat out 4 words, and besides that, he owed even one extra word. The man's face changed. After a brief hesitation, he pointed at Snape and said fiercely, "Are you one of them? Damn it. For God's sake, you better leave here now. We don't have this person here." "No. No. Is that right?" Snape asked coldly. The man suddenly began to float, his face turning red, and he opened his mouth to scream. But Snape casually pointed and said, "Shut up." He no longer cared about the fat pig floating to the ceiling. In fact, he had always had a grudge against Dumbledore for them to take care of Harry. Previously, under the pressure of Voldemort, he did not offer his own opinion. But now, some things must change. He walked into the room, scanned around, and at the dining table, he saw a boy as fat as a pig as his father, and a woman he had seen before. Although she has black hair, her green eyes are just like hers. Snape's expression remained devoid of any warmth, but his tone softened slightly. "Penny Dursley. I'm looking for Harry Potter. Where is she?" Penny held on to the spatula tightly in her hand, pulling her son Dudley up from the large plate of bacon in front of him, pulling him behind her, and then pointing pale at a door under the stairs. "Stairs." Snape frowned. He walked over with a step, his leather shoes creaking on the floor. Dolly wanted to say something, but his mother tightly covered his mouth. Snape opened the door and a thin, red-haired figure slept with its back to him on his old wooden bed, which was supported by books on all 4 legs and was not stable. He even saw a nest of spiders in the corner. This place is filled with a musty smell, and the space is so cramped that he even has to bend down to enter. The man remained silent for a while, but instead of waking the girl, he turned around and gently closed the door. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath, his complex emotions becoming increasingly entangled. Penny murmured, wanting to say something. Snape raised his hand and gestured for her to shut up. The woman complied. He calmed his mood for a moment, then opened the door again and walked in. He woke up the girl by patting her. She rubbed her messy hair and sat up drowsily, groping a few times to put on her glasses. With her emerald green eyes, she looked at Snape and said, Sir. May I ask, what's up with you? Are you a government worker? Did Aunt Penny still send me away?" Snape just stared at her in a daze. 2 minutes later, when the girl felt a little uneasy about it, he dryly said, "I'm a teacher at Hogwarts, you can call me Severus Snape. I'm here to pick you up from school." Harry blinked and tilted her head, saying, "Hogwarts. What is that?" Snape hesitated for a moment and asked, "Have you not received the letter?" "What letter?" He turned his head and looked at the woman in the corner of the kitchen. She ran trembling into the trash can and dug out a pile of letters to hand to Snape, then sobbed and ran away. "These letters." Snape handed them to her and then walked out of the room. Signing the contract was quite unexpected. Also, due to personal reasons, there is only one change today. "I'm sorry. I will make up for it tomorrow, and it will be 3 shifts tomorrow." End of this chapter. Chapter 10. I am a professor, so I can. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 10. I am a professor, so I can. 20 minutes later, dressed neatly, Harry sat at the dining table. She saw her uncle and aunt huddled on the sofa in the living room with frightened faces, with Dudley squeezed in the middle and even struggling to breathe. They dared not even breathe. Due to the size difference between them, this scene looks quite absurd and comedic. It seems that this professor has done something to them, Harry thought. She looked down at the letter in her hand and said, A wizarding school. Is that what I thought? Sir, you're not joking with me, are you? Snape tried hard to make his expression appear more gentle. However, he spoke like Tom Hanks, who had been stranded on a deserted island for over a decade. Yes. There will be some changes this year, but it will still be teaching people how to master magic. Harry glanced at the letter in her hand again and suddenly asked, "Sir, do you know me?" Snape looked at her, the sunlight shining through the window behind the kitchen, and even the dust in the air was clearly visible. Her red hair and emerald green eyes. For a moment, Snape thought he had returned to the past. For some reason, he didn't answer the question and instead shifted the topic awkwardly. "Miss Potter, if you're willing, I can take you to prepare for school now. We will officially start school on September 1st, so there are still 2 days left." Harry smiled and pushed her glasses. "I think I have the answer, Professor Snape," she said. "However, I don't think I have a choice. Goodbye, Aunt Penny, goodbye, Dolly, goodbye, Uncle Vernon." Harry laughed and drank the warm milk that was originally Dudley in front of her, then said, "So, how do we get there? Don't you need to bring anything, such as changing laundry?" "Ah, I only have 3 clothes that can be changed, and they are all very worn out." The girl scratched the back of her head with some embarrassment, but her smile remained bright. "The school should distribute school uniforms, right?" Snape nodded. He was carrying a suitcase, and Harry followed him out empty-handed. They arrived at a secluded corner of the community, and Snape closed his eyes. He calmly mobilized the magic prepared in advance for meditation and opened a portal, behind which was a place Harry had never been before. The streets are clean and tidy, and the beautifully decorated shops have large flashing light signs. At this moment, Snape noticed that the girl was acting unprecedentedly awkward and uneasy. He took a step forward and walked into the portal, reaching out a hand to signal the girl to hold it. Harry felt a strange tremble as she crossed the portal, and so they arrived at the commercial streets of London. "I thought the places the wizards were going to would be a bit more peculiar," Harry whispered with a forced smile. "This is not the wizard's place." For some reason, he couldn't even say the word muggle and instead used a rare word. "This is where ordinary people buy clothes." "Oh." Harry appeared somewhat uneasy, and Snape only realized that the indifference and maturity that the girl had just shown in that nightmarish room was probably just a facade of self-protection. Harry pinched her wide and tattered sleeves, wanting to say something. But Snape just pulled her forward with a firm tone. "In order not to cause any small trouble to Hogwarts' image, I think you need some new clothes, Miss Potter." He looked up, not wanting Harry to see his expression. Therefore, he also did not see Harley's expression. That was a heartwarming smile that contained gratitude and confusion. They walked into a high-end clothing store, offering everything from men's, women's, and children's clothing. Snape said to the clerk in a somewhat awkward tone, "Please find some fitting clothes for this lady. Money is not a problem. I need 5 sets of summer and winter clothing each, and I also need socks. I need about 10 pairs of long socks, short socks, and woolen socks. Also, please prepare 5 pairs of shoes." The female shop assistant looked at Snape's eyes as if they were glowing and said, "Okay. Sir." Haley pulled up Rasnap's sleeve and whispered, "Isn't that too costly, Professor?" Snape glanced at her, trying to pull a comforting smile on his face. But his degraded facial muscles clearly couldn't make him make such a friendly expression, so his expression that looked more like a ghost than a smile made Harry burst out laughing. Snape turned his face away and muttered softly, "Okay, okay. That's enough to achieve the goal." 2 hours later, Harry walked out of the Gringotts wearing a fitted black suit, and she also changed into a new pair of glasses. Snape followed behind her, as if he were a butler. Harry's other clothes are packed in his black suitcase. Harley, who had switched to a high-end custom-made suit, had her hair cut short. Her red hair was no longer messy, but rather cut into ear-length pieces. She hummed a song that Snape didn't understand in a happy mood, and occasionally turned around to look at him, squinting and laughing. The feeling of becoming a millionaire is strange, Professor. But it's not as good as I found out that everyone here seems to know me. She greeted a hunchbacked wizard in a black robe who passed by her, and that guy had a surprised expression on his face. Snape stared at him coldly until the guy ran away in a disheveled manner before giving up. He followed behind Harry, pondering his words and saying, "You are indeed very famous." Harry turned his back to Snape and couldn't see the girl's expression. He only heard her voice. "Is that right?" Snape walked up and gestured for the girl to follow him closely. "We originally needed to purchase wizard robes and wands, textbooks, and a bunch of miscellaneous items for you. But this year we have a new way to keep these things away." He took Harry to the noisy entrance of a pet store and pushed open the door for Harry to go first. "But you must have a pet, an owl, a toad, or a cat," he said. Harry was strolling around the shop, and the animals shrank when they saw her, as if afraid of something. The female owner of the pet shop wanted to introduce her, but Snape just made a simple gesture, indicating that Harry would choose on her own. "I don't know. Professor, they all seem a bit scared of me." "It's okay. It's up to you to choose them, not them to choose you. Just choose one you like." Snape calmly answered the girl's question. He casually took out a pile of gold gerunds from his briefcase and threw them to the female shopkeeper. Harry refused, but she took out a handful of her own money from her pocket and smiled awkwardly at Snape. "If possible." Of course, Snape took back his own golden gallon. Harry ran into the middle of the owls. The group of owls in the birdcage had different colors, but they all turned their backs and didn't look at her. She ran to the display window of the toad again, and they didn't even make a sound, looking motionless as if they were dead. And the cat simply ran to various corners to hide. Harry turned around and gave Snape an apologetic smile, thinking it was her own fault for these animals being so abnormal. "Sorry, Professor. It seems like they don't really like me. But it's okay, I've been like this since I was young," she said. Snape took Jean Jalong out of the reluctant hand of the female shopkeeper and put him in his pocket. Pulling Harry out of the door, he asked, "So, do you have any favorite animals?" The girl tilted her head under the gloomy London sky and thought for a moment. Her red hair was so prominent that she said, "Snake, is that okay?" Snape pursed his lips and replied, "Usually it's not possible." The girl's eyes dimmed. He continued, "But I am a professor, so I can." End of this chapter.